When my husband told me to follow my mother's wish, I thought it was just another trip to clear my head. But what that wish led to, still haunts me till today. This is my story, and it's one I've never told anyone before. This story is a personal confession told from an anonymous point of view. It explores love, secrets, and emotional choices that changed everything. Viewer discretion is advised. When my husband said those words, "Just follow your mother's wish," I didn't realize how much those 5 words would change everything. I remember the night clearly. We were sitting in the living room, the air heavy with the smell of rain and silence. My mother had been staying with us for a few weeks after her surgery. She was recovering, but she had become different. Demanding. Emotional. She'd always had strong opinions, but lately, they felt sharper, more personal. She'd been telling me what a real man should do, how a husband should behave, how a wife should act, and how a marriage could survive only when the woman knows her place. I used to laugh it off, until the day she pulled me aside and said something that stuck deep in my chest. "If you love your wife, don't let her lose her essence. She's unhappy, even if she won't tell you." I didn't know what she meant. My wife, Ada, had been distant lately, yes, but I thought it was stress. We'd been married 7 years, and comfort had replaced passion. We still smiled at each other, but there was a wall, invisible but firm, between us. One evening, after another quiet dinner, my mother called me to her room. Her tone was soft, almost hesitant. "Son," she said, "I have a wish. Let her travel home with me for a few weeks. Let her rest, breathe, and remember herself." When I told my husband, Ada's husband, he looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly and said, "If that's your mother's wish, then follow it." He didn't question it. He didn't argue. Maybe that's what hurt the most, his calm. Because deep down, I knew what it meant, he had already given up trying to reach me. The next week, I packed my bags and followed my mother's wish. We traveled back to her hometown, a quiet village that smelled of rain and red soil. The nights were long, the stars brighter than I remembered. But something felt strange. She introduced me to everyone as if she was preparing me for something. And that's when I met him. He was her neighbor's son, much younger, yet confident in a way that disarmed me. His eyes carried mischief and calm at once. He offered to help around the compound, fixing small things, carrying water, chopping firewood. My mother seemed to trust him completely. I didn't think much of it at first, until one afternoon when the generator failed, and he offered to fix it. I was alone in the house. My mother had gone to the market. The silence between us that day was loud, louder than I could handle. That's when things began to shift. That's when I started questioning if following my mother's wish was ever truly her idea, or if it was fate giving me a dangerous choice I wasn't ready for. That afternoon still replays in my head like a song I can't stop humming, every sound, every glance, every breath. The generator had gone off again, and the heat was unbearable. My mother had gone to the market, leaving me alone in the compound. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, folding clothes, anything to ignore the silence that wrapped around me. But then, I heard a knock. It was him. Chike. He stood by the door, shirtless, holding a spanner and a coil of wire. His smile was easy, almost boyish, but his eyes carried a quiet confidence. "Mama said I should help fix your generator," he said. I nodded, trying to hide the slight unease in my chest. He started working behind the house, and I brought him a bottle of water. That's all it was supposed to be, a small gesture of thanks. But the moment our fingers brushed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, warmth. Not just physical warmth, but the kind that stirs memories of being wanted. I stepped back quickly, pretending nothing happened. But as he worked, I found myself watching him, the way his shoulders flexed, the way he hummed to himself, the ease in his movements. It reminded me of how distant my husband had become. How mechanical our conversations were. How long it had been since someone had looked at me like I mattered. The sound of the generator roared back to life, startling me. Chike turned and grinned. It's working now, he said. Thank you, I replied, avoiding his gaze. No need to thank me. I like helping. Something about the way he said I like helping lingered in the air, soft, but loaded with meaning. When my mother returned later that evening, she found me unusually quiet. She noticed everything, but said nothing. That night, as I lay awake, her earlier words echoed in my mind, let her remember herself. The next day, Chike came again, this time to trim the flowers outside. My mother was home, chatting with the neighbors, and I thought it would be harmless to sit outside while he worked. But the way his eyes found mine, even in a crowd, made it hard to breathe. Over the next few days, his visits became frequent, sometimes to help, sometimes to chat. He asked about my life in the city, about my husband, about what I missed most. I laughed more than I had in months. I told myself it was innocent, two people just talking. But deep down, I knew I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't explain. One afternoon, it rained suddenly. We both rushed into the corridor for shelter. The wind howled, and thunder rolled like it was warning us. The rain trapped us there, close enough to hear each other breathe. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. He looked at me, eyes soft but searching. You don't smile often, he said. Maybe I forgot how, I replied, half joking. Then maybe someone should remind you. Those words, gentle, dangerous, unforgettable, were the beginning of everything that followed. I didn't realize it then, but that simple sentence had already rewritten the story of my life. My mother's wish had taken me back home, but fate had brought something, or someone else entirely into my world. I kept telling myself that nothing was happening, that it was just a passing connection, an innocent friendship between two people trying to escape boredom. But temptation doesn't always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in laughter, in comfort, in the kind of understanding you stopped expecting from your partner. The next few days passed in a blur. My mother's health improved, and she started going out more often. That left me home most afternoons, doing little chores, waiting for the evenings to pass. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that I heard his familiar whistle outside the window. Chike stood there, smiling, holding a small basket of mangoes. Mama said you liked mangoes, he said casually. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides everything you can't say out loud. He sat on the porch while I peeled the fruit, and we talked. About the village, about city life, about dreams that never happened. He had a way of listening that made me feel like my voice mattered again. My husband hadn't asked me about my dreams in years. When I left, he watched me, not with hunger, but with awe. That was even more dangerous. The days rolled by, and with each one, our conversations grew longer. Sometimes, my mother would catch me smiling at my phone, a short text, a missed call, a memory replayed in my mind. She never asked questions, but her silence spoke volumes. One evening, she told me something that left me uneasy. Son, she said, people come into our lives for reasons we don't always understand. But don't forget the life you built before now. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp, as if she already sensed what was unfolding. A few days later, Chike came by to help move some boxes in the backyard. It was nothing unusual, but that day, everything felt charged, heavier than the air around us. He worked quietly while I handed him the smaller items. Our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart raced, and I could hear my own breathing. It wasn't passion, it was confusion, longing, guilt, and a strange kind of peace all mixed together. For a few seconds, I forgot about my husband, about my mother's wish, about everything that had once made sense. Then he stepped back, breaking the moment. You should go inside, he said softly. Before someone sees us. That was the first time I saw hesitation in his eyes, like he, too, knew we were walking a thin line. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every thought of him came with guilt, but also with warmth. My husband had been calling, but our conversations were short, routine. He'd ask about my mother, about the weather, and then hang up. Not once did he ask, "Do you miss me?" I began to wonder if he already knew something was changing, if he had sensed the emotional distance long before I did. By the end of that week, I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer the same person who had left home to follow my mother's wish. Something inside me had awakened, something I couldn't ignore anymore. The line between comfort and temptation was gone, and the only question left was how far I was willing to go before everything came crashing down. There are nights that stay with you forever, nights that change the course of your life, even when you wish you could forget them. That night was one of them. It started with a simple power outage. The entire village went dark after a heavy storm. My mother had gone to stay at my aunt's house for the night, leaving me alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I lit a candle and tried to read, but my mind was somewhere else, replaying every conversation, every look, every silence I'd shared with Chike. Around 8 p.m., there was a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, there he was, soaked from the rain, holding an umbrella that did little to protect him. "The storm broke the fence near my mother's house," he said. "I came to check if you're safe." He didn't need to come. There was no danger. But he came anyway. I told him to come in and dry off. He hesitated, then stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the tiled floor. The candlelight flickered, casting soft shadows across his face. He looked tired, but his eyes, those calm, unreadable eyes, carried something I hadn't seen before. We sat quietly, the sound of rain filling the room. I offered him tea, but neither of us drank it. The silence stretched, heavy with things we couldn't say. He broke it first. "You shouldn't be alone in a storm like this," he said softly. "I've been alone longer than you think," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked. Not as a friend, not as a neighbor, but as someone who saw past every layer I had built around myself. In that moment, I felt a truth I couldn't run from: I was tired of being invisible. I stood up, pacing toward the window, pretending to check the rain. But my hands were trembling. I could feel his gaze on my back, and I didn't know whether to run or to stay. My heart raced, and before I could say anything, I felt him step closer, not too close, just enough that I could feel his presence. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. "I understand." That line, simple, quiet, and kind, broke something inside me. All the years of silence, neglect, and loneliness came rushing back like a flood. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It was two lonely souls crossing a line neither of them intended to cross. Outside, the rain grew louder. Inside, time stood still. Afterward, we sat in silence, both of us breathing heavily, neither daring to speak. The candle had burned halfway down, its light trembling like my conscience. Guilt crawled in immediately, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to say it was a mistake, but I couldn't. Because deep down, a part of me didn't regret it, not in that moment. When he finally left, I watched him disappear into the rain. My heart ached, but not just from guilt, from the realization that something inside me had awakened that I could never bury again. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every second, every word. By morning, I couldn't face my mother. When she returned, she noticed my silence but said nothing. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe mothers always do. My husband called that evening. His voice was calm, ordinary. He asked if everything was fine, if my mother was recovering well. I said yes to everything. But when he said "I miss you," I froze. Because for the first time in our marriage, I didn't know if I missed him back. The morning after that night, everything looked the same sunrise, the same quiet village, the same scent of wet earth after rain. But inside me, everything had changed. I couldn't look at my mother without guilt. Every word she spoke sounded like a warning I had ignored. Every call from my husband felt like a test I was failing. And every time I caught sight of Chike walking past the compound, my heart tightened with a strange mix of longing and shame. For days, we avoided each other. The air between our houses felt heavier than ever. I tried to act normal, helping my mother, going to church, pretending to be the same person I was before. But no matter how hard I tried, the silence between us screamed louder than any confession could. One evening, as I stood outside watching the sunset, I saw him again. He was by the gate, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us moving. Finally, he walked up to me and said softly, "I think it's better if I stop coming around." It was the right thing to do, but hearing it still hurt. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Maybe it's for the best," I said. He sighed, glancing toward the fading sun. "I didn't mean for this to happen. You're not the kind of person people forget easily." His words hung in the air, trembling with sincerity. Then he turned and walked away, no dramatic goodbye, no promises, just quiet footsteps fading into the evening. That night, I cried. Not because of what happened, but because I realized how empty I had become before all this. I had been living like a shadow in my own marriage, surviving instead of feeling. And now, for the first time in years, I felt, even if it was wrong, even if it was fleeting. A week later, my mother told me she was strong enough to return to the city. My husband was waiting to pick us up. The drive home was silent, filled only with the sound of the tires on the road. He asked if the trip had helped me reconnect. I said yes, though I knew he didn't understand the truth of that answer. Back home, everything was familiar yet foreign. The same walls, the same routines. But I wasn't the same. I found myself studying my husband's face, searching for signs of love or loss, anything real. He looked content, peaceful even. Maybe he trusted me too much. Or maybe he had simply stopped wondering who I really was. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling again, the same way I had that night in the village. Only this time, it wasn't guilt that kept me awake. It was the haunting realization that sometimes love dies quietly, long before betrayal ever happens. And sometimes, it takes the wrong person to remind you what being alive actually feels like. To this day, my husband never found out. My mother never spoke of it. And Chike, well, I never saw him again. But every time it rains, every time the lights flicker and the world goes silent, I remember that night. Not as a mistake. Not as a sin. But as the moment I realized how fragile love, loyalty, and loneliness can truly be. Because when my husband told me to follow my mother's wish, I did. And that wish, though meant to heal me, ended up revealing a version of myself I can never forget. In the end, her husband's simple words, "Follow your mother's wish," led her down a path she never expected. What began as an innocent visit turned into a journey of rediscovery, temptation, and painful truth. She didn't set out to betray anyone, she only wanted to feel seen, heard, and alive again. Sometimes, love doesn't die in one moment, it fades slowly, buried under silence, routine, and neglect. Her confession isn't about pride, but about pain, the kind that reminds us how fragile loyalty can be when the heart feels forgotten. Every secret has a heartbeat, and every confession has a lesson. Hers is simple. Be present before your partner starts looking for presents elsewhere. Sometimes, the choices we make in silence echo louder than words. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true confession stories that reveal the hidden sides of love, marriage, and life itself. Speech Balloon, tell us in the comments, do you think she made the right choice, or was it already too late? Thank you for watching, and see you in our next emotional confession story.